Hello, everyone, and welcome to another night of Galagathon. Tonight, I am honored and pleasured to have a legend, an Atari programming legend. Howard Scott Warshaw is here tonight. A little bit of background about Howard. Howard was a Atari programmer engineer from 1981 to 1984. He's known for making three of Atari's greatest games: Yara's Revenge, Raiders of the Lost Ark, and E.T. And he's currently a psychotherapist in Silicon Valley. Howard, thank you so much for coming on. I am really excited to have you on today. This is great.
That's great to be here, Mark. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. I've been doing some homework on you and reading a lot of other interviews, and it's really incredible that, back then, you working for Atari. So what actually got you into doing? Because I know you worked at Hewlett Packard for a while, and with your engineering degree. So what got you into working for Atari? Was there something that happened between working for Hewlett Packard and Atari? What was intriguing about Atari that got you involved in working there?
It's an interesting story. When I was at Hewlett Packard, in college, I had avoided computers like the plague until about the middle of my sophomore year. And then finally, I was told that I had to pick up a computer course because I was working in economics at the time. And I tried it and I thought, oh my God, this is like, I was suddenly imbued with the magic formula that this is how I need to go to school and this is what I need to do is work in computers, because I just loved it. So I was very passionate, very excited. I worked through my bachelor's and got a master's in computer engineering, and then jumped out into Hewlett Packard, and suddenly all the excitement, all the joy, and all the passion that I had for computing was gone. It just disappeared. And it was really depressing, actually. And but I'm not a typical depressed character. So what I would do is I was acting out a lot at Hewlett Packard. I was kind of a wild guy at Hewlett Packard, which at Hewlett Packard isn't that difficult to be. But I just did a lot of things and some goofy stuff, and people would go home and tell Howard stories. Here's what Howard did today. So one day a guy comes in and he says, I was telling my wife a Howard story last night, and she said, that sounds just like what happens all the time where I work. And I asked, oh, well, where does she work? And he says, oh, she works at Atari. That was the first time I'd ever heard of Atari as a place to work. Right. I mean, I had heard of Atari, I knew they made video games. I wasn't even a big player of video games. I wasn't that into video games at that point. But I was into interesting computing, and I was into goofier work environments. So, I talked my way into an interview, and did get to interview there, and went through a series of interviews, and it was all good. And I realized the kind of work they were doing, which is like real-time control microprocessor-based programming. That's the kind of programming I love to do. That's what I've been trained in. That was my passion. And that's what I was not doing at Hewlett Packard. So I thought, oh, I've got to come here. I've got to work here. This is going to be great. And then after a whole series of interviews and everything all looked good, the hiring manager called me up and said, we're not going to make you an interview. We're not going to make you an offer. They rejected me. So it's like,
wow, that's crazy.
It was interesting. And so I basically talked him into letting me come and give me a try. And the rest is truly history at this point.
So what was the culture like there? I've actually watched the documentary, The Atari Game Over, and if anyone hasn't seen it before, it's a great documentary about a little bit of the history of Atari. What was the culture like? I mean, so one of my favorite movies is War Games, and War Games is Matthew Broderick's character. He calls Cindy. I love that movie.
Love that movie.
Yeah, he tries to break into. It's my all-time favorite movie, and what got me into technology. And I like the part where he's trying to get into the Sunnyvale, California company. They didn't say it was Atari, but it's still Sunnyvale, California, and he's trying to get in, and he's trying to hack in. And so what was I thought that was really just an amazing part, him using a modem. Nobody was using a modem, and it was way ahead of its time.
Right.
So what was the culture like at Atari as far as the culture is concerned?
The technical culture or the people culture?
I would say a little bit of both, because you had the technical culture. What did each look like? Because there's different layers of that, right? You had the the culture of the people that you spent days with and programming and your coworkers. And then you have the marketing side of it. So, as far as like pushing these games out to the public. So what were both of them? What did they look like at the time?
Well, these are huge topics, right?
Yeah.
So briefly, I could tell you that, the technical culture was just, there was a lot of prototype stuff and a lot of black boxes, and we were just sort of working on with 8-inch floppies. When I first got there, we were using floppies to store the discs, and it was a very simple system with an emulator, and there was a logic analyzer, and that was our only debugging tool. And you just read the manual and just started programming and tried to make it work, and it was a very sink or swim kind of thing, which I really enjoy. And but the people culture was astounding. It was amazing. It was the most interesting and engaging group of people I think I've ever worked with. And I've worked with some pretty interesting groups of people. Because I've been in a lot of different industries, worked in a lot of different places, and but the group that I worked with when I first got to Atari, that crew, that was an amazing collection of wild, interesting, very intelligent, broadly skilled and interested people. So every day you'd come in, you'd never know what was going to happen next. You didn't know what people were going to do, what were they going to think, what we're going to talk about, but it was always interesting. It was also scary at times because things were pretty high stakes, and because it was such a cool place to be, you're always worried it's going to go away.
Right, sure.
Because also this was in the middle of a huge cultural transition, the transition from Nolan Bushnell to Ray Kazar. And these are things that I talk about at length in my upcoming book, which I think people will probably be pretty interested in, because it is a huge topic. The whole idea of the change and the shift that Nolan Bushnell had launched a truly innovation-focused fledgling entertainment technology company that was really gaining steam and really starting to take over. And Ray Kazar was a very traditional, old school management type person from classical industry, which had nothing to do with entertainment technology. And so the idea of someone who was entirely focused on how to do this new thing, but very little awareness of operating a business at a huge scale in the world, was replaced by a guy who knew only about operating a business at a huge scale in the world and knew absolutely nothing about the product and the technology or the market that we were working with. And so there were schisms, there were weird interactions, there were points of conflict and confrontation that came about. And so when I first got there, marketing didn't really have a lot of say. What we would give marketing products when they were done, and they would go out and sell them. They would package and sell them, and it was great. That worked fine. As time went on, marketing gained a tremendous amount of influence and control in the environment, to the point of truly inverting where the power structure was. And so originally marketing was in service of engineering, and I think ultimately engineering was in service of marketing. And it's tough when you have people running a production who don't understand the product at all. I mean, really have no concept of what it's like. And the famous example is E.T., right? The idea that the company believed, it's one of the great hallmarks of this cultural transition. Right, if you would have gone to Nolan Bushnell and said, we need a game in 5 weeks, he would have just laughed at you and said, that's ridiculous, go back and rework this because that's not going to happen. With Ray Kazar, under Ray Kazar, what happened was they made a deal, spent a lot of money, leaving a 5-week window to develop a game, then told engineering about the game, we need the game in 5 weeks. It wasn't a, can we do it? It was a, here's what we're going to do. And my boss's boss did tell them, no, you can't do it. And then once Ray Kazar heard that from the head of VCS engineering, he still called me up for some reason to say, hey, Howard, we need a game in 5 weeks. Can you do it? And I told him, absolutely I can. Provided we reach the right agreement.
So did you feel, so what you just described, it's almost like, as if there was like a disconnect between the corporate environment, between the corporate, between your bosses, your managers. There's like a disconnect between them and the engineers.
Right. And I would disagree with one thing you said. And that's when you said almost like, because it's exactly like that.
It was a disconnect. Okay. Yeah.
It's a total disconnect between engineering and the rest of the company, essentially, which in some ways was the way the company was set up, because engineering was isolated because you didn't want people messing around with the engineers too much when the engineers are really under pressure to try and do creative breakthrough things. So they need the space and the room to do that, and somewhat of an extraordinary environment in which to do that. But the rest of the company needs to be informed about what's happening, and they didn't really know the questions to ask. And I'm not sure they were clear about what to do with the information they were given at times. So there was really, there was a lack of education, right? I mean, there was a lack of education. I think a lot of engineers believed we were the center of the universe and didn't really need to know or care about what went on in the rest of the company. But the rest of the company definitely, I think, needed more awareness and education about what went on in engineering, what product requires, what development cycles look like, so they could plan appropriately and do things like that. And there was no effort to really close that gap. So I was kind of unusual in engineering in that I had a degree in economics in addition to my engineering and technology stuff. So that was kind of unusual. There weren't a lot of engineers who had any kind of business background or education. And so I was more interested in communicating with other parts of the company. I was a little more interested in figuring out what else was going on, because I almost went to business school. I thought I could either go to business school or I could go to technology for graduate school. I decided to go through technology because I figure I'll get business education. It's easier to learn business in a company if you know technology than it is to learn technology in a company if you know business. That was at least my supposition. So I went to Atari because I thought it would also be a good business school for me. And man, did I get an education.
Yeah, it sounds like it. So when you came on board, in '81, and did you feel any type of pressure as far as putting out, putting out a game? What kind of did you feel any type of pressure? Here you are, you finally got your foot in the door. You're programming. You're going to get an opportunity to program some games. Did you feel any type of pressure as a new kid on the block?
Great question. I felt huge pressure, enormous pressure. I needed to prove myself. I mean, I made a deal essentially with them. I went to Atari for a significant cut in pay and on probation, just to have the opportunity to try and prove myself. I felt I needed to prove myself to really justify myself, given that I'd made such a big deal about trying to get in the first place. Also, I really wanted to succeed at this. It was really important to me to do this because I've always kind of wanted to go into entertainment in some form or another. I like the idea of being an entertainer. And I thought, this is my opportunity. If I can make a good video game, that will entertain hundreds of thousands or millions of people potentially. So I really liked that idea. So I really wanted to do it. So I showed up and I wanted to do my best, and they gave me an assignment to convert the coin-op game Star Castle. And here I am on probation. I've been there less than a week. They gave me an assignment and I looked it over. I had read the manual. And the first thing I did was I went to my boss, the guy who did hire me, who I talked into hiring me. And I told him, this game isn't any good. This is going to suck. I don't want to do it. It's like,
that's pretty ballsy there, Howard.
It was pretty, I was a pretty ballsy guy, I must say. And and I didn't just leave it at that though. I went out to him and I said, look, this game isn't going to work well in our system. It just doesn't really convert well at all. I said, but I think I can take some of the basic play elements and rework them. And I laid out an alternate design of a different way of approaching the game. And I said, now this I think would work much better on the system. Now, I'd only been there a few days. It's like I'd only just read the manual, and I'm basically telling this guy, and he knew how to program on the system. So he was looking at me a little bit like, what the hell is this? But at the same time, I think he kind of knew I was right. And he recognized what was going on. So he said, okay, why don't you go ahead and give that a try? Which was an amazing thing, because it wouldn't be long after that that if a request had come in from marketing to do a specific game, like a coin-op game, we would not have been allowed to change the game development. You know, they would have said, no, we've got this license, we have to do this game, period. But he was cool enough and he let me run with it. And that's the game that became Yar's Revenge, ultimately. So that was pretty cool.
Yeah, so I actually still play Yar's Revenge. I play it probably once or twice a week, trying to get trying to loop the game is what I'm trying to do right now.
Cool.
Yeah, I enjoy it. Tell us a little bit about Yar's Revenge. I mean, that's it was one of Atari's biggest, in my opinion. It was one of their, outside of the Activision games that came out later on, the third party games. It's probably one of the best games on the system. Can you tell us a little about your concept behind Yar's Revenge and some details on that game?
Well, my concept with Yar's Revenge is I just wanted to do something that was literally a audio-visual feast. I wanted to do something that was just super intense visually. I had a very elaborate audio system. These were all things that I planned from the start. I did not plan to make it Yar's Revenge. I had no idea what the theming or the characters
were.
Oh,
sure. Okay.
All I did was I invented an animation for the Yar, which was just something that I thought would look cool and worked at various angles, because I wanted the graphic to be fairly consistent at various angles as you're moving around the screen. And the shield and the idea that that's moving around on the screen, so it's a moving target. And I just started developing that. And then the ion zone, the flickering thing in the middle, I started to come up with that after a while and get the visuals down. And it had to be a very visually generous game. I wanted to do things nobody had ever done before. Because it wasn't that I said, oh, I'm going to do things no one's ever done before. The way it works with me typically is I don't know how else to put it. I just don't think like most people do. So sometimes it's absurd and ridiculous, and I come up with stupid things that everybody looks at and goes, what? That's ridiculous. What are you talking about? But sometimes I come up with things that people go, oh, I never thought about that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's interesting. And so I didn't have to try to do that. That's just who I am. And so I did that with this game, and I started to put things up on the screen, and right away people started to look at what I was doing and like, did you see what the new guy did? Did you see that thing? It was like people were starting to note that I was doing stuff that was interesting to see after a while. But the truth is, after a few months, the game kind of sucked. It was like, it looked cool, but it didn't really play well. And the problem with it was I had a bad controller scheme, because the one thing I had hung on to from the coin-op game was the controller scheme, and tried to adapt a coin-op button controller scheme to the joystick on the VCS, which really doesn't fit. And somebody said to me, you need to just move the thing around, just be able to move the character around. But if you did that, you had no way of accessing the main weapon to win the game. So I didn't think that was viable. But then I thought, they're right, I do need to move it around. So when I took that button off the stick, right, when I took that one function off the stick, I thought I've still got to be able to do that. What can I do? So I converted it to a play sequence. And the idea was to generate the Zorlon cannon, right? It used to be you pull back on the joystick to get the Zorlon cannon. It was easy. And so instead, I removed that from the joystick. And then what I did was I went over, I put in the thing where you got to eat a brick or touch the co-tile in order to get the Zorlon cannon. And once I did that, you had freedom of motion, and it was a play sequence to generate the weapon. And now you're just free running around the screen, trying to line up your shots. And then it came together, and then it was cool, and everybody liked it. Everybody liked it. And
yeah.
Super exciting. I thought, oh, thank God, because believe me, before I started to make that change, when I was sitting there after several months of working there, I'm thinking, oh, great. Now I've made something that looks cool and sucks. And what am I going to do? I really did not know what to do. But I got some help from my friend, right? And people made some suggestions, and I thought it through, and I changed the functionality, and it turned into to a really hot game. And it was just exciting. I mean, there were even people in coin-op who were talking about possibly making a coin-op game from the VCS game, which had never happened.
Wow, that's the opposite. That's the complete
Exactly.
opposite.
We always tried to make VCS versions of coin-op games. No one had ever thought of doing a coin-op version of a VCS game. But that discussion came up. Of course, it didn't happen. But the idea that it was even mentioned was like, holy crap. And Yours Revenge set a lot of standards, a lot of industry standards. I mean, one of the reasons you're probably able to play a few times a week, but trying to roll the game, because it's tough to roll that game in one sitting, right? That just takes a long.
Oh yeah, it's a long game. Yeah.
But Yours Revenge was the first game to have something that comes in very handy for what you're trying to do, and that is a pause mode. Yours Revenge was the first game to have pause. And so it's the first.
Wow, I did not know that.
Yeah, it's the first full screen explosion, elaborate death sequences, a very elaborate layered sound system. It has the code on the screen, it displays the code on the screen. The Ion Zone is actually the code from the card because I didn't want to spend memory space on graphics for something. I thought I just want something that's a randomized glittery effect, something like you'd see on Star Trek back in the day.
Nice.
And so I realized, code, that's kind of a pseudo-random looking kind of bit pattern. So I just started grabbing code and shoving that in the graphics register and the color register in the playfield. And that's how the Ion Zone is made. So it was really just born of doing really, really cheap techniques that had high yield. I was all about bang for the buck, right? Because my bachelor's is in economics. So it was all about efficiency, right? I was really good at looking at a system and figuring out what's something that's very inexpensive to do that looks bigger, that looks sensational, that looks really cool. That's what I was about, and that's what Yours Revenge was all about. And then I made up the story for it, and it became the first game with a backstory. So I invented backstories for video games. And it was the first game with an ancillary product with a comic book that went along with it. And I was also the first game to get the programmer credited for it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, your initials are in the. I thought that was really cool. The first time I discovered that and I read about that. That's amazing.
Well, that's the Easter egg.
Yeah, that's the Easter egg. Yeah,
and but it's also on the comic book. They have credits, and my full name, is listed as the programmer of the game.
See, yeah, because the programmers, a lot of people, today, there's so many great programmers, and the programmers get the credit. The programmers back then they did not get the credit that they deserved.
Well, not at Atari, right? At Activision and at Imagic, the programmer's name was on the box, right? They would say this game was designed by or programmed by, and they would give the name. So because they wanted to use that in marketing. They wanted to know people to have followings, and that would be a good way to sell the games. Atari did not want any other person than Atari identified as the creator of the game, right? They wanted to retain that. So they were very against giving credit to programmers and things like that. But I was able to break that taboo. So once, and then they never did it again. But at least it happened. So there was a lot of breakthrough stuff that happened with Yours Revenge. And again, that's another chapter in my upcoming book. If people really want to know about the culture of Atari, I did a documentary series called Once Upon Atari. That's available at onceuponatari.com. You can even get an autographed DVD if you like. And so that's available. And upcoming, I have a book coming up the book is going to be called Once Upon Atari, How I Made History by Destroying an Industry. Because E.T. was credited with destroying the entire video game industry. So that's the principal thing of my book. And it's a lot of the stories some stories that I did cover in the documentary, a lot of stuff that I didn't, because this is more about me and my experience there, which is really not much in the documentary that I did for some reason. I'm not sure what that reason is, but that's all history. That's a whole nother documentary.
Right.
So that's pretty much my story with Yours Revenge.
Yeah, I think, and another thing too is, some people don't know that Yar is actually Ray backwards, and that's Ray Kazar. How in the heck did you sneak that in?
Well, that's
amazing
that I got that in. I mean, that's another whole story in the book about how I named Yours Revenge, and I did it to outmarket marketing. I did it because I basically pulled a fast one on marketing. And I'd love to tell you that story, but I'm kind of running out of time. I have a client coming up at 9:30.
Okay, well, yeah, well, thank you so much for coming on today and talking a little bit about your your history at Atari, and appreciate your support for Galagathon this year. And
Well, I mean, this is a great cause. I think what you're doing is amazing. I really want to take a moment to respect the fact that you are not daunted by the pandemic and that you're still moving forward with a more aggressive goal at a time when it's even harder to pull off. That's amazing. And it's really an honor for me to help contribute to that. So thank you for
yeah,
the opportunity, Mark. I
yeah,
really appreciate it.
yeah, thank you for coming on.
It's my pleasure.